She had worked 3 years at that hospital without a single complaint, without a single mistake, without a single person bothering to learn her last name correctly. They called her the quiet one. They called her slow. They called her a liability in a fast trauma environment where speed meant everything and hesitation meant death. Dr. Marcus Whitfield called her worse. In front of 17 colleagues, in the middle of a packed emergency department on a Tuesday afternoon, he looked at Nurse Lena Hargrove and said the words that would later haunt every person in that room. "You are the most useless person in this department. Do us all a favor and stay out of the way." 90 seconds later, 3 black military vehicles pulled into the ambulance bay. The men who stepped out weren't there for the surgeon. Welcome. Before we go any further, if stories like this are what you live for, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Drop a like on this video and tell me in the comments what city and country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now, let's get into it. Bum. Lena Hargrove arrived at Calloway Memorial Hospital in Denton Falls, Virginia at 5:47 in the morning, the same time she had arrived every shift for the past 3 years. She parked in the same spot at the far end of the staff lot, the one near the broken light fixture that facilities management had logged 17 work orders to fix without result. She carried her own coffee because the break room machine left a bitter film on everything it touched. She changed into scrubs in the locker room before anyone else arrived, taped 2 fingers on her left hand where the skin cracked every winter, and clocked in 4 minutes early. Nobody noticed any of this. That was fine. Lena had spent a long time learning how to move through spaces without being noticed. It was a skill, like any other, and she had practiced it deliberately. The day shift charge nurse, Donna Price, handed off the board without making eye contact. 3 patients in observation, 1 waiting on labs, a 14-year-old in Bay 6 who had been there since 2 in the morning with abdominal pain that wasn't presenting the way abdominal pain was supposed to present. Lena read the chart twice before she even entered the bay. She had a habit of reading charts the way other people read contracts, looking for what wasn't there. "Morning," she said to the kid, whose name was Tobias. He was curled on his side with his knees drawn up, which was already one thing the chart hadn't mentioned. "Hey," he said. His voice was thin. "I'm Lena. I'll be with you this morning." She pulled the rolling stool close and sat at his level rather than standing over him. "Tell me where it hurts." He pointed to his right lower quadrant, which matched the chart, but his hand drifted slightly upward after, toward the flank, which didn't. She spent 11 minutes with him. When she came out, she flagged Dr. Priya Solis, the junior attending on overnight coverage, and said quietly, "I want a urinalysis and a retroperitoneal ultrasound on Tobias in Bay 6. His flank presentation is being masked by the lateral positioning." Dr. Solis looked at her. "The chart says RLQ tenderness. Appendix workup is already ordered. The chart is incomplete." "Nurse Hargrove." Solis kept her voice even with the particular patience people use when they're choosing not to be openly condescending. "We have the workup ordered. I'll review the results when they come back." Lena nodded. She went back to her other patients. The ultrasound results came back 40 minutes later. The appendix was clean. The retroperitoneal space showed a partially obstructing ureteral stone that had been there long enough to cause secondary inflammation, which is why Tobias had been lying on his side since 2 in the morning without anyone understanding why. He needed urology, and he needed hydration management, and he needed someone to update his pain protocol. Solis ordered all 3 without comment. She didn't acknowledge the flag Lena had raised. That was also fine. Lena wasn't doing this for acknowledgement. Dr. Marcus Whitfield arrived at 7:15. He was the kind of physician who made an entrance even when he was just walking through a door. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the deliberate posture of someone who had been told his whole life that he was impressive and had simply decided to believe it. He was chief of emergency medicine, a position he had held for 6 years and referenced in conversation approximately 3 times per hour. His residency had been at a program with a name he mentioned. The way people mention where they summered, casually, repeatedly, always in contexts where it didn't quite fit. He swept through the department the way he always did, chart in one hand, coffee in the other, making observations loud enough for everyone to hear. "Who cleared Hernandez in 4? He's still guarding his abdomen." "I did," said Donna Price. His labs were within range. His labs were borderline and his presentation was equivocal. Don't clear equivocal presentations. He moved on before she could respond. He passed Lena at the medication cart without looking at her. This was normal. In 3 years, Dr. Marcus Whitfield had looked directly at Lena Hargrove approximately 6 times. She had counted, not out of bitterness, but because she counted things. It was another habit. The mass casualty alert came in at 8:22 a.m. The overhead tone sounded 3 times. The sequence that meant incoming trauma, multiple victims, estimated arrival less than 10 minutes. The board lit up. Donna Price was already on the radio. 2 of the trauma bays were still occupied from overnight. Lena moved to clear Bay 3, stripping the linen, resetting the cart, checking the crash equipment without being asked. "What are we looking at?" she asked the unit coordinator, a young man named Greg who was trying to manage 3 phone lines at once. "Highway collapse. Some kind of structural failure on the 19 overpass. Fire department says at least 22 victims, mix of trauma and exposure." Lena paused at the word exposure. Exposure to what? They don't know yet. Hazmat is on scene. The first ambulances arrived in 7 minutes. The victims were in worse shape than the radio calls had suggested. Blunt trauma was expected, but several of the patients showed signs that didn't track with standard collision injuries. Pupils that were asymmetrically reactive in ways that blunt head trauma alone didn't explain. Excessive secretions. One man's muscle tone was wrong in a way that made Lena's hands go still for just a moment as she helped transfer him from the gurney. She kept working. The department filled fast. Whitfield was in Bay 1 running a trauma resuscitation on a man in his 50s with suspected aortic injury. He was in his element there, technically skilled when the situation matched his training, decisive when the variables were the ones he'd practiced. Lena didn't doubt his hands. She doubted his peripheral vision. Bay 4 held a woman in her 30s who had been conscious on arrival but was declining. Her pressure was holding, her chest X-ray was unremarkable, her GCS was dropping anyway. The resident assigned to her was a second-year named Dr. Ansel Park, who was smart and willing, but who had graduated medical school 14 months ago and had never seen anything like this morning. Lena was in and out of Bay 4 3 times in 20 minutes. Each time she came in, she noted something and filed it. The woman's name, per her ID, was Sandra Voss. She was 41. Her clothing had been cut away on arrival, and the residue on her jacket, a dark, slightly oily stain near the left shoulder, had been bagged as a matter of protocol. Lena asked Greg to pull up the hazmat team's preliminary field report. He looked at her like she'd asked for something unusual, but he pulled it. She read it standing at the nurse's station with the controlled chaos of the department moving around her. The field report listed the preliminary atmospheric readings as within acceptable parameters, which meant, whatever this was, it wasn't dispersed in the air. Contact exposure. Concentrated. And the compound the hazmat team flagged as unidentified in the 3rd line of the report, the one they had labeled simply as unknown organophosphate class agent non-standard, made Lena set the paper down very carefully on the counter. She stood there for 4 seconds. Then she walked to Bay 4. "Stop the fluids," she said. Dr. Park looked up from the IV line he was managing. "Excuse me?" "The saline push. Stop it." She was already at the bedside, her hands on Sandra Voss's wrist, counting. "Her bradycardia is going to worsen with fluid. You're going to drive her into a cholinergic crisis. She's hypotensive. She needs volume. She needs atropine. Now. And I need you to call pharmacy for pralidoxime." Park stared at her. He was 29 years old and she was a nurse, and this was not how the hierarchy was supposed to work, and his face showed all of it at once. "What are you—" "Organophosphate toxicity, non-standard military variant. The presentation is atypical because the compound is modified, but look at her pupils. Look at the fasciculation starting in her forearms. The fluid will accelerate the muscarinic response." She kept her voice level. Not slow. Level. "She has maybe 6 minutes before this becomes a resuscitation instead of a treatment." Park's eyes went to Sandra Voss's arms. The fine muscle tremors were visible if you were looking for them. He looked at Lena. "Call pharmacy," she said again. "I'll get Whitfield." She went to Bay 1. Whitfield was finishing the aortic case, calling out orders in the clipped rhythm of someone who had run 1,000 traumas. She waited for the natural break in the sequence. She was not someone who interrupted unnecessarily. And then she stepped into his line of sight. "Dr. Whitfield, Bay 4 Voss." She has organophosphate toxicity from the overpass exposure, modified compound. She needs atropine and pralidoxime initiated immediately. He looked at her for the first time all morning. The look was not recognition. It was the look people give when something unexpected has stepped into their path. What? The highway compound. It's not standard trauma exposure. The hazmat field report flagged an unidentified organophosphate class agent. Voss is showing classic cholinergic signs: meiosis, hypersecretion, fasciculations, bradycardia. The fluid push Park is running is going to worsen. Park is managing that patient. He turned back to his own chart. Let him manage it. He doesn't recognize the presentation. Then he'll learn. He didn't look up. That's what residency is for. She'll be in cardiac arrest before he learns. That made him look up. The look was different now, sharper and colder. Nurse Hargrove. He said her name the way people say a word they've had to look up the spelling of and resent needing to. You are an emergency department nurse. You triage. You assist. You do not diagnose, you do not countermand treatment plans, and you do not walk into my trauma resuscitation to lecture me about a patient you have no primary role in managing. Are we clear? The room had gone quiet the way rooms go quiet when something is happening that people will remember later. Lena looked at him. She thought about 6 things in approximately 2 seconds. The compound class, the timeline, Sandra Voss's forearm tremors, the distance to the pharmacy, the weight of the moment against the weight of the institution. And she said, perfectly clear. She walked out of Bay 1. She walked to the pharmacy window, not the phone, because the phone added 90 seconds she didn't have. She told the pharmacist on duty exactly what she needed and why. She said it in the specific clinical language that leaves very little room for questions. The pharmacist, a woman named Rita Chambers who had worked at Calloway for 19 years and had a reliable instinct for when someone standing at her window actually knew what they were talking about, pulled the atropine without waiting for the physician order to appear in the system. You need someone to cover you on this? Rita asked. I need you to start the pralidoxime infusion the moment the order clears. And if it doesn't clear, Lena picked up the atropine, then I'll deal with that separately. She was in Bay 4 with the medication when Whitfield caught up to her. He had moved fast. She had underestimated how fast. And he came through the bay curtain with the particular energy of a person who has decided something is going to happen. Put that down, he said. No. She uncapped the syringe. Hargrove. His voice dropped to a register that was meant to be dangerous. In her experience, voices that dropped to registers meant to be dangerous were compensating for something. I will have you suspended before you finish that sentence. You can suspend me after. She administered the atropine. Her hands didn't shake. They had never shaken when it mattered. It was one of the only things about herself she had never had to train. Some people came out of crisis steadier than they entered it, and she was one of those people, and she had learned long ago not to question it. Sandra Voss's heart rate, which had been sitting at 44, began to climb. 47. 51. 56. The secretions slowed. Dr. Park was very still at the foot of the bed, watching the monitor. Whitfield watched it too. 62. 67. She's responding, Park said quietly. He sounded like someone who had just watched a car accident resolve itself into something other than what it was going to be. The color was coming back into Sandra Voss's face, not dramatically, not like the movies where people gasp back to life, but in the incremental, stubborn way that real recovery looked. A slight reduction in the grayness around her mouth, a flicker of eye movement, her respiratory rate settling from the panicked, shallow cycling it had been doing into something slower and more functional. Whitfield stood very still in the bay doorway. His face did something complicated. Then it simplified. You are done here, he said to Lena. His voice was quiet now, which was worse than when it was loud. You are done in this department. Security will escort you out. Donna Price appeared in the doorway behind him, her face carrying the particular expression of someone watching something happen that they wish they could stop but have calculated they cannot. Marcus, she started. She administered a controlled substance without a physician order in a patient she had no authority to treat. He was looking at Lena, not Donna. She is terminated. Effective now. Lena capped the empty syringe. She set it on the tray. She looked once more at the monitor. Sandra Voss's heart rate was holding at 71. And she said, to Dr. Park specifically, you'll want to recheck her pupils every 10 minutes and have the pralidoxime running within the hour. The modified compound has a longer half-life than standard organophosphate agents. She'll need monitoring for at least 18 hours. Park nodded. He looked like he was trying to memorize everything she was saying. She walked out of the bay. The department had that particular stillness that happens when a group of people have collectively witnessed something and haven't yet decided what it means. Nurses at the station. A tech holding a specimen tube. A paramedic who had stayed to do paperwork and had no idea why everyone was standing so still. Lena went to the locker room. She took off her ID badge and set it on the bench. She changed out of her scrubs with the same methodical efficiency she brought to everything. She folded the scrubs. She put on her street clothes. She picked up her coffee thermos, which still had coffee in it from this morning because she had not had a chance to drink any of it. She was sitting on the bench with the thermos in her hands when her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A number she didn't recognize. A Virginia area code, but not local. She answered. The voice on the other end said 4 words before anything else. We found you, Hargrove. Lena closed her eyes for exactly 1 breath. Then she opened them. Outside, in the ambulance bay that was visible through the narrow locker room window, she could see the parking lot. She could see the street beyond it. And she could see, pulling slowly through the hospital entrance, 3 black vehicles with no civilian markings, moving in the deliberate, coordinated way that only people with a very specific kind of training ever moved. They weren't pulling up to the emergency entrance. They were pulling up to the main entrance, and they weren't stopping at the security desk. She sat with the phone against her ear and watched the 3 vehicles complete their turn into the hospital's main entrance loop. And she didn't move, and she didn't speak, because the voice on the other end hadn't spoken again either. And in her experience, the person who broke that kind of silence first was always at a disadvantage. The voice came back. Male. Mid-40s, she guessed, with the flat cadence of someone who had spent a long time giving information without inflection. You still there? Yes, she said. We're at the main entrance. We need 5 minutes of your time. I've just been terminated. A pause. We know. She looked at the thermos in her other hand. The coffee was cold by now. She had never gotten to drink it. She set it on the bench beside her badge and stood up. Give me 2 minutes, she said. She did not rush. Rushing was for people who were surprised, and Lena Hargrove had stopped being surprised by a great many things a long time ago. She checked her appearance in the small mirror above the sinks, not out of vanity, but out of habit, the same way she checked equipment before using it. And she walked out of the locker room, through the back corridor that ran behind the nursing station, and out through the side door that fed into the main hospital lobby without passing through the emergency department. She didn't want to walk through the emergency department, not because she was ashamed of what she'd done, but because the people in that department were in the middle of managing a mass casualty event, and she was no longer on their roster, and walking through would be a distraction they couldn't afford. The lobby of Calloway Memorial was the kind of space that hospitals built in the 90s when there was money and optimism. High ceilings, a skylight that had been leaking for 2 years, chairs arranged in clusters that nobody used because the sick and the frightened never wanted to sit in clusters. A volunteer in a pink vest was directing a confused elderly man toward radiology. A woman in scrubs was on her phone near the vending machines, crying quietly in the way people cried when they were trying not to be seen doing it. The 3 men standing near the main entrance doors were not difficult to identify. It wasn't the clothes exactly. They were in civilian clothing, dark pants, unmarked jackets, but there was something about the way they stood that civilian clothes couldn't fix. The distribution of weight, the angle of attention, the way all 3 of them had positioned themselves with their backs to different walls without appearing to have coordinated it. The one in the center was the tallest, late 40s, close-cropped gray at his temples, a jaw that looked like it had been set wrong once and healed that way. He was watching her come across the lobby with an expression that was not quite neutral. There was something in it that she couldn't immediately categorize, and she filed that away. Hargrove, he said, when she was close enough that he didn't need to raise his voice. You have me at a disadvantage, she said. You know my name. Colonel David Reese, USAM RICD. He said the acronym like an address, matter of fact, expecting recognition. United States Army Medical Research Institute of Chemical Defense. She recognized it. These are Agents Polk and Navarro, Defense Criminal Investigative Service. She looked at the other two briefly. Polk was compact, square-faced, with the stillness of someone who listened better than he talked. Navarro was younger, darker, and clearly the one who was going to have opinions about everything. "You want to tell me what this is about?" she said. It wasn't a question. "We want to tell you a lot of things," Reese said, "but not here." His eyes moved briefly to the volunteer in the pink vest, the woman still on her phone. "Is there somewhere private?" There was a small family consultation room off the east corridor, the one used for delivering difficult news, with a box of tissues on the table and a painting of a landscape that had been specifically chosen to be inoffensive and had achieved its goal so completely that it was also entirely forgettable. She had used it once, 6 months ago, to sit with a man who had just been told his wife wasn't going to make it through surgery. She led them there now and closed the door. Reese didn't sit. Neither did the other two. Lena sat because sitting was a choice, not a concession, and she wanted to think clearly. "The compound on the 19 overpass," Reese said, "modified organophosphate, non-standard synthesis." She watched his face. "Not something the hazmat team would have in their field database." "No, it isn't." He pulled a tablet from inside his jacket and set it on the table, screen down. He didn't open it yet. "You recognized it." "I recognized the presentation. The compound itself is a variant of something I worked with in a classified context. I don't know how it ended up on a civilian highway in Virginia. That's what we're here to find out." He put his hand on the tablet but still didn't open it. "What you did in that bay this morning, the treatment protocol, the specific medication sequence, that's not in any civilian emergency medicine manual, not for this compound class." "No," she agreed, "it isn't." "So the question we have," Navarro said, speaking for the first time, and he had the voice she'd expected, a little too quick, a little too ready to fill silences, is how a hospital nurse in Denton Falls, Virginia, knows a classified treatment protocol for a classified chemical agent. Lena looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at Reese. "I think you already know the answer to that question," she said. Reese held her gaze for a long moment. Then something shifted in his face, not softened exactly, but recalibrated, the way a calculation looks when one of the variables turns out to be larger than estimated. "Sergeant First Class Lena Hargrove," he said. "Formerly of the 75th Chemical Brigade, attached to a Special Operations Medical Support Element from 2009 through 2018. 4 deployments, 2 classified. Last known assignment before separation." He stopped. "The file gets thin after that." "The file is supposed to get thin after that," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." He finally opened the tablet, turned it to face her. The image on the screen was a photograph of the residue sample from Sandra Voss's jacket, already processed and analyzed, which meant someone had been working on this since before the ambulances had even arrived at Calloway Memorial. "We have a problem, Hargrove. The compound on that overpass wasn't a spill. It wasn't an accident. The structural failure on the 19 bridge was—" He paused, choosing the word. "Assisted." The room was very quiet. "How many people know that?" she asked. "In this building?" 4. "The 3 of us. And now you." She looked at the image on the tablet, the analysis readout beside the photograph, the molecular markers that she recognized not from textbooks but from field reports she had read in places she was no longer supposed to talk about. "The variant," she said. "The synthesis marker on the left chain. That's not a domestic production signature." "No," Reese said. "It is not." She sat with that for a moment. Outside the consultation room, the hospital moved around them. The sound of wheels on linoleum, a distant intercom page, the compressed urgency of a building full of people trying to manage a disaster. Through the wall, faintly, she could hear the emergency department. Her emergency department. Except it wasn't anymore. "You need someone who can identify the full compound profile," she said. "We need someone who already has, and we need them to do it officially." Reese sat down across from her, finally. "The patients from the overpass. We're going to need to assess every one of them for secondary exposure sequencing. The modified compound has a delayed secondary phase that your standard hospital toxicology won't catch until it's already causing damage." "How long is the window?" 4 to 6 hours from initial exposure. We're at—" He checked his watch. 2 hours 40 minutes from the incident. Lena looked at the door. I've been terminated, she said. We know. Whitfield will not let me back into that department. We know that too. She looked at Reese steadily. So what exactly are you proposing? He reached into his jacket again. This time, what he put on the table was not a tablet. It was a folded document, and it was the kind of document that had a particular weight to it, not because of the paper, but because of what the paper represented. She recognized the header before she even unfolded it. Department of Defense, Joint Investigative Authority, Emergency Consulting Authorization. This gives you federal authority to access and treat the overpass victims in any civilian medical facility, Reese said. It supersedes Dr. Whitfield's termination notice. It supersedes hospital administration. It supersedes local medical board authority for the duration of the incident. She looked at the document. She did not pick it up yet. And in exchange, she said, you help us identify which patients have been exposed to the secondary compound phase, and you help us figure out where the synthesis signature came from. She thought about Sandra Voss's heart rate climbing back from 44. She thought about the other patients from the overpass, spread across the emergency department right now with doctors who had never seen this compound class and had no reason to know what to look for. She thought about Dr. Park, who was smart and willing and who was probably at Sandra Voss's bedside right now doing exactly what she'd told him to do, but who didn't know about the secondary phase. She picked up the document. She read it once, completely, because she always read documents completely before agreeing to anything. Then she folded it and put it in her jacket pocket. I need my access badge reactivated, she said, and I need a direct line to your toxicology team so I can cross-reference the compound markers as we assess patients. Already arranged. And whatever happens with Whitfield is not your concern, Reese said. We'll handle the hospital administration side. She stood up. She thought of one more thing. The boy in Bay 6, she said. Tobias. 14 years old, ureteral stone presentation. He's not from the overpass. Make sure someone checks on him. Reese blinked. It was a small thing, barely perceptible, but she caught it. He hadn't expected that. People rarely expected the particular way her attention worked, that it ran on multiple tracks simultaneously, and that the tracks didn't interfere with each other. I'll note it, he said. She walked out of the consultation room and back toward the emergency department, and this time she did walk through it, because she had a reason to now. The board had changed in the 40 minutes since she'd been removed from it. 16 of the overpass patients were admitted or being managed. Donna Price was at the nurse's station with the phone pressed between her ear and shoulder, writing something with the other hand. Dr. Ansel Park was in Bay 4. She could see him through the curtain gap, checking Voss's pupils the way she'd instructed. 2 nurses she didn't know well were working Bay 7 together, managing an elderly man who was doing the muscle fasciculations that she now knew to look for specifically. Whitfield was at the central station. He saw her the moment she walked in. His whole body changed, not dramatically, but in the way someone changes when they're about to say something they've already rehearsed. I want security. Dr. Whitfield. Colonel Reese's voice came from behind Lena. She hadn't heard him follow her, but she wasn't surprised that he had. My name is Colonel David Reese, USAMRKD. I have federal authority documentation authorizing Sergeant Hargrove's presence and clinical authority in this facility for the duration of this incident. He held out a second copy of the document. She hadn't seen him produce it, which meant he'd had it ready. You are welcome to call the number on the second page to verify. Whitfield took the document the way someone takes something they're angry at having to take. He looked at it. His jaw moved slightly. This is my department, he said. And those are my patients, Reese said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. We have approximately 90 minutes before a secondary exposure phase presents in a subset of the overpass victims. Sergeant Hargrove is the only person in this building who can identify that subset accurately. I would strongly recommend getting out of her way. The room was doing the thing again. Stillness. Everyone positioned in slightly different parts of the department, all of them absolutely attuned to what was happening at the nurse's station. Donna Price had put down the phone. Whitfield's face was doing things that faces do when a person is processing information that contradicts a story they've been telling themselves for a long time. His mouth opened, closed. Lena walked past him. She didn't say anything. She went to the board, pulled up the overpass patient list, and started working. The next 90 minutes were not clean. Real emergency medicine never was. Two of the overpass patients showed early secondary phase indicators, the specific pattern of delayed parasympathetic rebound that the modified compound triggered in its second metabolic cycle. She identified them both within 20 minutes of her return, flagged them to the attending physicians, directed the treatment adjustments, and kept moving. A third patient presented differently than expected because the modified compound apparently behaved differently in patients with pre-existing cardiac conditions, something that wasn't in the original field documentation she'd read years ago, which meant the compound had been further refined since she'd last had access to it. She noted this, flagged it to Reese's toxicologist on the direct line he'd provided, and kept moving. Dr. Park shadowed her for the first 20 minutes, not intrusively. He kept a respectful distance and didn't ask questions when she was actively managing something, only in the spaces between. She found she didn't mind it. He was absorbing rather than performing, which was the difference between someone who wanted to learn and someone who wanted to look like they were learning. The delayed phase, he said, during one of the spaces. What's the mechanism? The modified agent has a bifunctional inhibitor attached. Primary phase hits acetylcholinesterase fast, which is what you see on arrival. Secondary phase releases about 3 to 4 hours later when the metabolic byproduct of the primary inhibitor breaks down and the secondary inhibitor activates. Different binding site, slightly different presentation. He was quiet for a moment, processing. So it's essentially 2 exposures in one compound. Functionally, yes. Who makes something like that? She looked at him. He was asking clinically, not rhetorically. She appreciated the distinction. People who want the first wave of treatment to create a false sense that the situation is resolving, she said, and left it there. The third patient with the atypical cardiac presentation required a treatment modification she had to work out in real time, cross-referencing with Reese's toxicologist and making 2 adjustments to the protocol before the patient's rhythm stabilized. This was the part nobody who hadn't done field medicine understood about it, that field protocols were frameworks, not scripts, and that the ability to modify them in real time under pressure was the actual skill, not the memorization of the protocol itself. Whitfield was technically skilled in a controlled environment, but his training had taught him to execute within known parameters, and today's parameters were not in any manual he had ever studied. She was aware of him watching her. She didn't look over. Around the 90-minute mark, the third patient stabilized. She stood at the nurse's station and updated the treatment notes, and for the first time since she'd walked back through the emergency department doors, she stopped moving. Her hands, she noticed, were cold. They'd been cold for a while. She hadn't registered it while she was working. She flexed her fingers once, twice. Donna Price appeared beside her with a paper cup of coffee. Cafeteria quality, not from the break room machine, which was a small mercy. Here, Donna said. Lena took it. She didn't say anything for a moment. Did you know? Donna asked. Her voice was quiet, not accusatory, genuinely asking. About the compound? Not specifically. I recognized the class. I meant about you. About your... before. Lena looked at the coffee cup. The paper kind, with the thin sleeve that never quite stopped the heat from getting to your fingers. No, she said, and I didn't plan to tell anyone. Donna was quiet for a moment. That man Whitfield screamed at, in front of everyone. 3 years ago when you flagged the Kowalski kid and he'd already signed off the chart. Lena remembered the Kowalski kid. 8 years old, missed sepsis. She'd caught it on a recheck. Whitfield had told her she was second-guessing a physician and that if she did it again, he'd have her reviewed. You could have told someone then, Donna said. Told them what? That I was right about a sick kid? That doesn't require a military record. It requires someone willing to listen. Donna didn't have an answer for that. She probably knew the answer and didn't want to say it out loud, which was, nobody listened. The silence stretched for a moment and then was broken by Navarro appearing at the edge of the station, that slightly too ready energy of his barely contained. Hargrove, we've got something. She set down the coffee cup and followed him. Reese was in the corridor outside the department on his phone. He ended the call when he saw her. The synthesis signature, he said. Our lab matched it to a batch produced during a program that was officially terminated in 2019. Decommissioned. All stocks were supposed to have been destroyed. Supposed to have been, she said. Supposed to have been. He looked at the wall for a moment, then back at her. We have a chain of custody problem. We're looking at somewhere between 8 and 12 individuals who had authorized access to the destruction process. And we have a structural collapse on a civilian highway that used a chemical agent from that program. You think someone in the chain diverted stock before destruction? I think someone diverted stock and someone else used it, and those two people may or may not be the same person. He looked at her directly. The DCIS team is opening a full investigation. They're going to need your technical assessment of the compound, the modified synthesis markers, the protocol adaptations you made this morning, as a formal classified consultation. Lena thought about this. I've been out for 6 years. Your clearance was never formally revoked. It lapsed, but it can be reinstated with a signature. He pulled out the tablet again. This time it was open to a different document entirely. You came prepared, she said. We've been looking for you for 8 months, he said simply. We've been trying to figure out who built this compound. We didn't arrange today, but today told us something we didn't know before. What's that? That whoever built this was drawing on the same original research base you were trained on, which means the pool of people who could have done it is smaller than we thought. He held her gaze. And it means you're one of the few people who can help us work backward from the compound to the source. She stood in the corridor with the sound of the emergency department behind her and the sound of a hospital in controlled crisis around her, and the weight of a document she hadn't yet looked at in front of her. She thought about 6 years of early mornings and cold coffee and a parking spot with a broken light fixture and a chief surgeon who had never once learned to say her name right. She thought about a 14-year-old kid with a ureteral stone who needed someone to actually look at him. She thought about Sandra Voss, whose heart rate was probably sitting comfortably in the 70s right now, who would go home to someone who would not know how close it had been. She thought about this patient with the atypical cardiac presentation, whose modified exposure profile suggested the compound had been further developed by someone with a very specific and very dangerous combination of chemistry knowledge and operational intent. She took the tablet. She was reading the reinstatement document when the emergency department doors opened behind her, and Dr. Ansel Park came through them with the particular quality of movement that meant something had just changed. "Bay 4, he said. He was looking at Lena, not at Reese. "Voss, her pressure just dropped. 15 points in 6 minutes. It doesn't match the secondary phase profile you described." Lena was already moving. "What's her rhythm?" "Sinus, but she's got new ST changes on the monitor." "The cardiac variant," she said. She was already through the doors. "Get me the echo cart." "We only have one tech and he's in Bay. Get me the echo cart and I'll run it myself." She hit the Bay 4 curtain at a controlled speed. Not running, because running in emergency medicine caused mistakes, but moving with the particular economy of someone for whom urgency and precision were not opposites. Sandra Voss was awake, which was something. Her eyes tracked when Lena came in. Her skin had taken on a slight clamminess that hadn't been there an hour ago. "Hey," Lena said, pulling on gloves. "Still with me?" "Still here," Voss said. Her voice was thin. "Something changed." "I know. We're going to figure it out. You're the nurse who—" Voss stopped, started again. "You're the one who gave me the shot." "Yes." "The doctor tried to stop you." "He did." Sandra Voss looked at her for a moment. "I'm glad you didn't listen," she said. Lena was already positioning the ultrasound probe. The echo image came up on the cart screen and she was reading it before Park had finished moving to her side. And what she saw on that screen made her very still for exactly 1 second, the kind of stillness that was itself a communication, and Park read it. "What is it?" he asked. She kept her voice completely even. "The secondary phase in cardiac variant exposure doesn't just hit the autonomic system. It creates a direct myocardial effect." She was already adjusting settings. "She's developing a stress cardiomyopathy pattern. It's subtle right now, but it won't stay subtle." "What do we do?" She told him. Specifically and precisely and without hesitation, because hesitation was the thing that killed people. Not speed, not slowness, hesitation. The moment of not deciding that masqueraded as caution, but was actually fear. Park was writing as fast as she was talking. The treatment she was describing was not in any civilian protocol manual. It was drawn from a classified field adaptation developed by a medical support team in a place that didn't officially exist, in response to a compound that officially no longer existed, for a program that had been decommissioned in 2019, with all stocks presumably destroyed. Presumably. She was halfway through the protocol when the monitor above Sandra Voss's bed alarmed, and the rhythm that appeared on the screen was not the one she'd been expecting, and she said one word, sharp and immediate, and Park already had his hand on the crash cart, and behind her she was dimly aware of the curtain moving as other people came in, and somewhere in the controlled chaos of the next 4 minutes, she registered, without focusing on it, that one of the people who had entered the bay was not a nurse and not a physician, and not Reese. It was Whitfield. He was standing at the back of the bay. He wasn't giving orders. He wasn't countermanding anything. He was watching Lena Hargrove run a resuscitation with a classified treatment protocol on a patient he had nearly killed with a fluid push, and his face had the look of a man who is understanding something about himself that he has spent a very long time not understanding. Sandra Voss's rhythm converted at the 3-minute 40-second mark. The alarm silenced. The room breathed. Lena stepped back from the bedside, stripped one glove, and checked the time. She looked at the monitor for a long moment, reading the post-conversion rhythm with the focused attention of someone who does not trust recovery until they verified it 3 times. Then she became aware of something that had been happening at the edge of her attention for the past several minutes. A conversation in the corridor outside the bay, voices she could hear through the curtain gap, one of which was Navarro's, and one of which she didn't recognize. She looked at Reese, who had come in at some point during the resuscitation and was standing near the door. His expression had changed. "What happened?" she said quietly. He looked at her for a moment with the flat, recalibrated expression of someone who has just received information that changes the shape of everything. "The compound's chain of custody," he said. "DCIS just identified one of the 12 individuals with authorized access to the destruction process." She waited. "His name is Dr. Raymond Taft," Reese said, "former Army chemical defense consultant, left federal service in 2018. He paused. "He currently holds a position as a senior medical advisor for a hospital network." Lena went very still. "Which network?" she said. Reese looked at her. Then he looked briefly at Whitfield, who was still standing at the back of the bay, who had not moved, who was now also very still. "The Calloway Health System," Reese said. "He's been a board-level advisor here for the past 4 years." The silence in Bay 4 was absolute. Sandra Voss's monitor beeped steadily, evenly, the sound of a heart that had come back from somewhere it wasn't supposed to go. And somewhere in the hospital above them, on a floor that Lena had never had reason to visit, a man named Raymond Taft was presumably going about his morning, unaware that the compound he had diverted from a decommissioned program had just been identified by the one person in Denton Falls, Virginia, who was trained to recognize it. Reese was already on his phone before the last syllable had finished settling in the bay. He moved to the corridor with the controlled speed of someone who had spent decades making urgent things look measured, and Lena could hear fragments of what he was saying. Containment, advisory level, do not approach. But only fragments, because the bay curtain was between them and she had other things to attend to. She checked Sandra Voss's rhythm one more time, stable. The post-conversion pattern was clean enough that she allowed herself to believe it would hold. She gave Park the monitoring parameters, the specific intervals, the specific thresholds, the things to watch for, that wouldn't be in the standard cardiotoxicity protocol, because the standard cardiotoxicity protocol had never been written for this compound. And she told him to call her directly if anything changed, not the attending, not the charge nurse, her, and she gave him her cell number, which she had never given to anyone at Calloway Memorial in 3 years. Park wrote it on his glove. She noted this and did not comment on it. People in emergency medicine develop their own systems for retaining information under pressure, and writing on your glove was not the strangest one she'd seen. She stepped out of Bay 4. Whitfield was in the corridor. He hadn't followed Reese, and he hadn't gone back to the department. He was standing approximately 4 feet from the bay curtain with his arms at his sides and the look of a man who is waiting for something without being sure what he's waiting for. She stopped when she saw him. Not out of deference, she was past that now, had burned through whatever residual professional caution she'd maintained for 3 years in roughly 40 minutes, but because walking past him without acknowledging him felt like its own kind of dishonesty, and she didn't like dishonesty. "Voss is stable," she said. He nodded. One small movement. "The cardiac variant wasn't in the original compound documentation," she said. "It wasn't something you would have known to look for." She wasn't offering this as an excuse for him. She was offering it as a fact, because facts were the only currency that felt worth using right now. And he was still a physician in a department full of compromised patients, and he needed accurate information more than he needed her anger. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his face that she couldn't fully read and didn't try to. "Taft," he said. "Raymond Taft. You know who he is?" "I know what Reese told me. I've worked with him for 4 years." His voice was flat. Not defensive, genuinely flat. The kind of flatness that comes from trying to process something that keeps sliding out of focus. "Board meetings, quarterly reviews. He sat in on my department evaluation last spring." Lena looked at him. "He asked about our mass casualty protocols," Whitfield said. "Specifically, I thought it was due diligence." He stopped. She let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said, "I need to find Reese," and walked down the corridor. Reese was near the stairwell with Navarro and Polk. The conversation stopped when she approached, which told her the conversation had been about her or about something she wasn't yet cleared to hear, and she filed that away. "Where's Taft now?" she said. "4th floor, administrative suite." Reese looked at Polk. "We have eyes on the corridor." "You can't approach him yet," Navarro said. He was talking to Reese, but he was looking at Lena in the way people look at the person they consider the variable in an equation. "We don't have enough for an arrest. The synthesis match is circumstantial without the chain of custody documentation, and the custody documents are sealed pending the JAG review." "How long for the JAG review?" Lena asked. Navarro looked at her directly this time. 6 hours, minimum, possibly longer depending on the classification tier. "We have overpass patients who've been in this building for 3 hours, she said. "If Taft has any awareness that the compound was identified, if he has any contact inside this hospital who's already told him what's happening in the ER." She stopped because she could see Reese's expression shift, and the shift told her she wasn't saying anything he hadn't already thought. "Then 6 hours is not a number that works." "I know," Reese said. "Does he have access to patient records?" A pause. A specific kind of pause that had information in it. "He has board-level system access," Polk said. He had a quiet voice, deliberate. "Broadly speaking, yes." Lena thought about this, about what board-level system access meant in a hospital that was currently managing 16 chemical exposure patients, all of whose charts were active and being updated in real time. About what a man with chemistry knowledge and operational intent would want to know about those patients. About what he might do if he learned that one of them had been successfully treated with a classified protocol that shouldn't exist in a civilian emergency department. "He already knows," she said, "or he will within the hour." Reese didn't argue with her. "Then we work faster," he said, and that was all he said, and he pulled out his phone again. She went back to the emergency department, not because she had been told to, but because it was where she needed to be. The board showed all 16 overpass patients in active status, 2 of them now updated with the secondary phase treatment flags she'd added to their charts. She looked at the flags. She looked at the patient names next to them. She thought about board-level system access and what someone with chemistry knowledge would understand when he saw those specific treatment flags on those specific patients. She went to the unit coordinator's desk. Greg was there, looking somewhat hollowed out in the way people looked after 2 straight hours of managing a mass casualty intake. "Greg," she said, "I need a favor." He looked up. He was 24, maybe 25, with the kind of face that was still calibrating how much of the world to let in at one time. "Anything," he said, and she suspected he actually meant it. "The chart access logs for the overpass patients. Is there a way to see who's pulled those charts in the last 2 hours from outside the department?" He hesitated. Not because he was unwilling, but because he was processing the implication. "I can run a system access report. It takes about 5 minutes, but I'd need authorization from administration or—" "Run it," Reese said from behind her. She hadn't heard him come in. He produced a card and set it on Greg's desk. "Federal Investigative Authority. Run it now, please." Greg ran it. The report came back in 4 minutes and 30 seconds, which was faster than estimated because Greg was, beneath the hollowed-out exterior, extremely good at his job. Lena read it over his shoulder. 12 names had accessed the overpass patient files since admission. 8 of them were clinical staff actively managing those patients. 3 were from medical records, routine. One was a user ID that resolved when Polk pulled the system registration to an administrative account registered to a consulting position held by Dr. Raymond Taft. The access timestamp was 41 minutes ago. "He's been in the charts for 40 minutes, Navarro said. He had appeared without announcement, which seemed to be a consistent feature of his professional style. He knows which patients were treated with the secondary phase protocol. He knows something flagged in those charts that shouldn't be there if the compound was unrecognized," Lena said. She looked at Reese. "He'll want to know who made those flags." "Your name is on the chart entries," Polk said quietly. She knew that. She had known that when she was writing them. She had written them anyway because accurate documentation was not a thing she was willing to compromise, regardless of what it meant for her personally. But knowing a thing and having it confirmed were two different weights, and she registered the difference now. "We need to move him before he moves himself," she said. "Without the JAG documentation, we don't need to arrest him. We need to contain the situation." She looked at Reese. "There are 16 patients in this building who may still be at risk if Taft has any further access to this hospital's systems or physical spaces. That's not an investigative question. That's a patient safety question, and the federal emergency authority you gave me covers patient safety." Reese was quiet for a moment. I was looking at her in the way he had looked at her when he said, "We've been looking for you for 8 months," with the particular attention of someone recalculating. "What do you have in mind?" he said. She told him. It wasn't complicated. The best operational plans rarely were. Complicated plans had too many joints where things could fail. She had learned that in places that didn't officially exist, working with people whose names were above her clearance level, and the lesson had been taught repeatedly and sometimes painfully. Reese listened. Navarro looked like he wanted to object to something but couldn't identify exactly what. Polk just nodded at intervals in the way of someone who has seen enough operational planning to recognize when a plan is sound. They moved in 11 minutes. Polk went to the IT infrastructure room in the hospital basement with a DCIS technician who had been waiting in one of the black vehicles since this morning and had apparently spent those hours doing something productive with a laptop, because the administrative access credentials for Taft's user account were revoked within 4 minutes of Polk entering the building's network closet. Whatever Taft was looking at on his screen in the 4th-floor administrative suite went dark. Navarro coordinated with hospital security, not the regular desk staff, but the 2 senior security officers who had worked federal contract sites before moving to civilian work, who understood chain of command, and who, when presented with the federal documentation, asked only one practical question about exit coverage before positioning themselves. Reese went to the 4th floor. Lena went with him because she was the one who could identify, clinically and specifically, what the compound modification signatures meant, information that would be needed the moment Taft was confronted, because men with operational intelligence and compromised legal positions did one of 2 things when cornered. They went silent and lawyered up immediately, or they talked. And if Taft talked, she needed to be in the room to assess the accuracy of what he said. She had told Reese this in the corridor. He had looked at her for one long moment. "You understand this isn't a sanctioned interrogation," he said. "I understand I'm a federal consulting authority for the duration of this incident," she said, "and I understand that a man with board-level access has been reviewing the charts of exposed patients. And I understand that constitutes an ongoing threat to patient safety, which is exactly what my authority covers." He had not argued further. The 4th floor was a different world from the emergency department. The particular quiet of administrative spaces, carpeted corridors, closed doors, the muffled sound of a building being run rather than the sound of the building doing what it was built for. A receptionist at the end of the hall looked up when they stepped off the elevator, registered the quality of the men with Reese, and did the civilian calculation, and said nothing. Taft's office was the 3rd door on the right. The door was closed. Reese knocked once. Not the hesitant knock of someone uncertain of their reception. One single deliberate knock, the kind that says what comes next is not a request. A pause. Then a voice from inside, professionally modulated, "Come in." Raymond Taft was 63, perhaps 64, with the build of someone who had once been physically substantial and had let it go to something softer over the years of desk work. Silver-haired, wire-rimmed glasses, the careful clothes of a man who understood that appearance was a form of communication. He was standing behind his desk rather than seated, which meant he had been on his feet before they knocked, which meant he had been expecting something, possibly not them specifically, but something. His eyes went to Reese first, then to the DCIS credentials Navarro produced, then to Lena, and this was the look she had been waiting to see. The moment when he processed her presence in this room alongside federal investigators, and the calculation he had to make in real time about what her presence meant. His face didn't change much. He was good at faces. But there was something in the fractional pause before he spoke. "Colonel," he said, reading Reese's rank from the identification. "This is unexpected. How can I help?" "Dr. Taft," Reese said. "We're here in connection with the incident on the Route 19 overpass this morning." Terrible event. He moved to come around the desk, the practiced movement of a man accustomed to taking control of a room through physical positioning. "I've been monitoring the hospital's response. The ER has been exceptional under—" "Please stay where you are," Polk said. Quiet voice, zero ambiguity. Taft stopped. The room reconfigured itself. The practiced ease drained out of it, not dramatically, Taft was too experienced for dramatic, but perceptibly. He stood behind his desk, and the desk became less of a prop and more of a barrier. "The compound used in the Route 19 incident," Reese said, "has been matched to a synthesis batch produced under program designation Redline Kappa, a program you consulted on from 2014 through 2018 and were present for the official decommissioning of in October 2019. Taft looked at him steadily. He said nothing. He was doing the smart thing, the thing that people with legal intelligence and operational experience did when they understood the shape of the situation. But his silence was a particular kind of silence, and Lena knew the difference between the silence of someone who didn't understand what was being said and the silence of someone who understood every word and was calculating. She moved. Not to the center of the room, but she didn't want the center of the room. She moved to the side so that Taft had to choose between watching Reese and watching her, and when he chose Reese, she had about 30 unobserved seconds to look at his desk. The desk had a laptop. The laptop screen was dark. Polk's work in the basement. There was a coffee cup, a legal pad with handwriting she couldn't read from this angle, a phone, face down, and a pill organizer, the weekly kind with 7 compartments. It was open to today's compartment, which was empty, standard enough. But the configuration of the remaining pills visible through the plastic of the next compartments, the combination, the dosages she could partially read, was specific enough to tell her something. She looked at Taft. He was in his early 60s, sedentary build, likely hypertensive given the medication combination, which also meant, "He can't travel by air," she said. Reese looked at her. Those medications in his organizer include a high-dose diuretic combination consistent with hypertensive heart disease management. If he was planning to run, it wasn't going to be far. He's not in physical condition for a sustained flight operation. She looked at Taft directly. "You didn't plan to run. You planned to manage this from inside." The silence in the room changed quality. Taft looked at her with the full attention he hadn't given her until now, and in that attention she could see the recalculation happening. Who is this person? Why is she in this room? What does she know, and how? "And you are," he said. "Sergeant First Class Lena Hargrove," she said, "formerly of the 75th Chemical Brigade. I treated your compound's victims this morning, both exposure phases." Something moved through his face. Fast, and then gone. "The cardiac variant," she said, watching him. "You know about it." He said nothing. The original Redline Kappa compound didn't have the cardiac variant. That was added in the modification, which means the modification was done after the official decommissioning. She kept her voice the same way she kept her hands during a procedure. Steady, because steadiness was both a choice and a tool. "You didn't just divert stock, you continued the development. The pill organizer was sitting there on the desk, and the legal pad was sitting there with the handwriting she couldn't read, and the face-down phone was sitting there, and Taft looked at all 3 of these things for exactly 1 second. Not long enough to be called a tell, but long enough for her to catch it. "I need to call my attorney," he said. "You're not under arrest," Navarro said. "You can call anyone you want." "Then this conversation is over." "The patient's downstairs," Lena said. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't moving toward him. She was simply standing where she was, with the quality of stillness that wasn't passivity. That was, if anything, its opposite. The secondary phase of the compound. In cardiac variant presentations, there's a 3rd metabolic cycle we don't have documentation for, because it's specific to the modification. If there are patients in this hospital who are going to experience that third cycle, and I don't know what it looks like, I said this conversation is over. People will die, she said. Flat, not dramatic, just accurate. The room held. Taft looked at her. The attorney calculation and the other calculation, the one she was putting in front of him, were happening simultaneously behind his eyes, and she could see the conflict between them, and she didn't look away. The third cycle, he said finally. His voice was controlled in the way of a man who had decided to give exactly 1 inch and was measuring it precisely. Presents approximately 8 to 10 hours after initial exposure. Sympathetic rebound. It's self-limiting in subjects with healthy cardiac baseline. And in subjects with pre-existing cardiac conditions? He looked at her. It isn't self-limiting. She thought about the list of overpass patients. She thought about the man she'd seen in Bay 7, the elderly man with the muscle fasciculations, whose chart she hadn't had time to review in detail. How many of the patients from this morning are in that category? She asked. I don't know who your patients are. You pulled their charts 40 minutes ago. The inch he'd given collapsed. His face went somewhere else, not to the practiced neutrality of before, but to something that was working harder than that. You will want to look, she said quietly, at anyone over 60 with a documented cardiac history. She turned to Reese. I need to get back downstairs. He looked at her for 1 beat, reading the calculation, and nodded. Polk stays, he said, meaning with Taft. Navarro, with her. She was already at the door. The elevator was too slow, so she took the stairs, and Navarro was 2 steps behind her the whole way, and when she pushed through the stairwell door into the ground floor corridor. She was already thinking through the patient list, names, ages, presenting conditions, and she was already moving toward the nurse's station before Navarro had cleared the door behind her. Donna Price was there. Donna had stayed at the station through everything, which was something Lena noted and filed. Donna Price was the kind of nurse that held a department together through the force of consistent presence. The elderly patient in Bay 7, Lena said. What's his cardiac history? Donna pulled the chart up in 3 keystrokes. 71 years old, previous MI, 2 stents placed in 2021, currently on dual antiplatelet therapy. Lena looked at the clock on the wall. The incident on the overpass had been called in at 8:06 a.m. It was now 11:47. 3 hours and 41 minutes since initial exposure. The third cycle presented 8 to 10 hours after initial exposure, which meant they had between 4 and 6 hours, possibly less if the cardiac history accelerated the timeline. What's his name? She said. Walter Greer. She went to Bay 7. Walter Greer was 71, with the wide-palmed hands of someone who had done physical work for a long time before he stopped, and he was sitting up in the bed eating a cup of ice chips because his nausea had reportedly resolved. He looked better than he had on arrival, which was exactly what the first 2 exposure phases did. They created a window of apparent improvement that the third cycle then shattered. Mr. Greer, she said, pulling a stool close. I'm Lena. I've been helping manage the patients from the bridge this morning. He looked at her with the specific wariness of a man who has had a medical professional come to his bedside with a stool and a particular expression often enough to know it preceded information he wasn't going to like. What is it? He said. She told him the truth because he deserved the truth, because he was 71 and he had 2 stents, and he understood his own body well enough to have participated in managing it for 7 decades, and she was not going to sanitize the situation into something more comfortable and less accurate. She told him there was a third phase of the exposure that presented later than the others, that it involved a cardiac stress response, that his history made him higher risk, and that she needed to move him to the cardiac monitoring unit immediately and start a protective protocol. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he set down the ice chips. Are you going to be able to fix it? He said. She looked at him steadily. I'm going to do everything I know how to do. He nodded once, the nod of a man who has lived long enough to know that was the best answer available and also the only honest one. She was calling for the transfer when the charge desk phone rang, and Donna picked it up, and the expression on Donna's face shifted in the way that expression shifted when the information coming through the line was not the information you were prepared to receive. Donna held the phone out. It's for you, she said. 4th floor, it's Colonel Reese. Lena took the phone. We have a problem, Reese said. He was using the same controlled voice from the consultation room, the flat informational cadence. But something underneath it had changed. What happened? Taft's attorney called in, he said. Not from outside, from inside the building. The attorney is here, Hargrove. He was already here. In the building. She thought about the face-down phone on Taft's desk. The one Polk had noted. The one that had been face down before they entered the room. He called before we knocked, she said. We think he called when the system access was revoked. When his credentials went dark, he used the cell to call a number that connects to a law firm that specializes in federal defense. And that law firm has someone in this building right now, and that someone is in the process of filing for an emergency injunction to prevent us from conducting any further action against Taft, pending the classified documentation review. She was quiet. The JAG review is still 6 hours minimum, Reese said, and if the injunction goes through, we can't touch him. And the patients? A pause. He's already arguing that any patient care directives originating from your federal consulting authority are legally challengeable during the injunction period. Another pause, shorter. He's trying to block your access to the overpass patients. The department around her, the board, the bays, Walter Greer behind his curtain with his cup of ice chips, Sandra Voss in Bay 4 with her post-conversion rhythm holding steady, Dr. Park with her cell number written on his glove. All of it settled into a particular clarity that she recognized, had always recognized, from years of operating in places where the situation changed faster than the plan. He's trying to remove the one person in this building who can identify what's about to happen to his victims, she said. That's how it reads, Reese said. Yes. She looked at the clock. 4 hours, possibly less. Walter Greer. And anyone else in this building over 60 with a cardiac history who had been on that overpass at 8:06 in the morning. She handed the phone back to Donna. Pull the full overpass patient list, she said. Age, cardiac history, any pre-existing cardiovascular diagnosis. All 16 of them. Donna was already typing. Lena looked at the stairwell door at the end of the corridor. Above her, on the 4th floor, a man who had continued developing a decommissioned chemical weapon and deployed it on a civilian highway was sitting behind his desk with his attorney and an emergency injunction. Below her, in a basement, Polk was in an IT room that would not stop what was about to happen legally, even if it could stop it technically. Beside her, Navarro was on his own phone, his too-ready energy finally finding a productive outlet as he relayed information in clipped, precise sentences. And somewhere in the building, or possibly outside it, an attorney with a federal defense specialization was preparing paperwork that would, if successful, remove the only clinical authority in this hospital capable of managing a third-phase chemical exposure event in high-risk cardiac patients. Donna slid the printed list across the desk. Lena looked at it. 4 names flagged with cardiac histories. Walter Greer. A woman named Patricia Vane, 66, with a previous arrhythmia diagnosis. A man named Douglas Marsh, 58, with a recent bypass. And a 4th name at the bottom of the list with a cardiac history notation that made her read it twice. The 4th name was not a patient. It was a staff member who had been in the ambulance bay during the initial patient intake, part of the trauma team that had met the first ambulances. Caught in the peripheral exposure during the unloading process, when the compound residue on the victim's clothing had been disturbed by the movement. The staff member's name was Dr. Ansel Park, and his chart notation, which he had apparently filled out himself at some point during the morning, because Park was the kind of person who documented everything even when the thing being documented was himself, showed a cardiac history she had not known about. A congenital arrhythmia, diagnosed at 19, managed with medication, clinically stable for 9 years. Clinically stable. Until now. She was already moving toward Bay 4 when the monitor alarm reached her from across the department. Not the steady beep of a stable rhythm, but the irregular, urgent sound of something going wrong. And it was coming from the direction she was running toward, and it was not Sandra Voss's monitor. It was the portable unit clipped to Dr. Ansel Park's belt, which he had apparently put on himself sometime in the last hour, quietly, without telling anyone, because he was the kind of person who monitored things even when the thing being monitored was his own heart. The alarm wasn't loud. Hospital monitors were calibrated to carry across a department without becoming noise, and the sound of Park's portable unit doing something irregular cut through the bay. 4 corridor the way a wrong note cut through music, not because it was volume, but because it was wrong. Lena covered the distance in 11 seconds. Park was on his feet, which was the first problem, because standing was exactly the wrong posture for what his monitor was showing. He was holding the portable unit in one hand and looking at it with the expression of a physician reading his own data, clinical, analytical, and underneath that, working hard to stay clinical and analytical. "Sit down," she said. "I'm fine." "You're in a big eminal pattern and your rate is dropping. Sit down." He sat. Not because she told him to, she could see the moment he made the decision himself, the internal calculation completing, but because he was smart enough to trust the data over the feeling, which was harder than it sounded when the data was about your own body. She had her hands on his wrist before he was fully seated. Pulse. Irregular in the specific way the monitor was showing, which meant the monitor wasn't artifacting, which meant this was real. "How long have you had the monitor on?" she asked. "About 40 minutes. I borrowed it from the equipment room when I noticed the fasciculations." He looked at his own forearms. The fine tremor was there, subtle but present. "Did you tell anyone?" A pause. "No," he said. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the particular expression of someone who had done something they knew was not ideal and was not going to pretend otherwise. "I didn't want to pull clinical resources," he said. "We had 16 active patients." "You are a clinical resource." "I know." She pulled the stool close and sat at his level and put the portable unit on the bed beside him so they could both see the screen, and she assessed, properly, systematically, the way she'd been trained to do when the patient in front of you was someone who would be inclined to underreport because they didn't want to be a problem. Park was going to underreport. She could already see it in how he was holding himself, the effort to look more stable than he felt. "Rate the nausea," she said. 4 out of 10. And actually, a beat. 6, maybe 7. Chest tightness? Some, not severe. Since when? 30 minutes, approximately. She thought about the timeline. The overpass incident at 8:06. Park in the ambulance bay during initial intake, peripheral exposure. 3 hours and 40-something minutes ago. The third cycle, per Taft's information, presented 8 to 10 hours in. But Taft had said self-limiting in healthy cardiac baselines. Park's baseline was not entirely healthy. The congenital arrhythmia he'd managed for 9 years was currently being provoked by the second phase sympathetic rebound. And if the second phase was already creating bigeminy in a 29-year-old with a managed arrhythmia, the third phase was going to hit differently than Taft had described. She needed a cardiology consult, and she needed it immediately, and she needed to move Park to a monitored bed, and she also needed to simultaneously manage 3 other high-risk cardiac patients. And the legal injunction was sitting somewhere above her head like a weight that hadn't finished falling yet. She stuck her head out of the bay. "Donna!" Loud enough to carry, not loud enough to alarm the department. "I need cardiology on the phone now, and I need a monitored bed on the cardiac floor." Donna was already reaching for the phone. Navarro appeared at the edge of the bay. He'd been close. He'd been staying close since the 4th floor, which she had noticed and said nothing about because she didn't dislike the instinct. "The injunction," she said to him quietly. "Where is it?" "Filed. It's with the duty judge. Could be 30 minutes, could be 2 hours. Can it be challenged?" Reese has JAG working the counterargument, but the sealed documentation is the problem. They can't reference classified materials in an open court filing, which means the counterargument has a hole in it until the tier review clears. She looked at him steadily. "If the injunction goes through and I'm removed from these patients, then the hospital's attending physicians resume primary authority. Whitfield resumes primary authority." Navarro met her eyes. "Yes." She looked at Park, who was sitting on the bed watching his own monitor with the focused calm of someone using clinical detachment as a coping mechanism, which was a legitimate coping mechanism and also one with limits. "Ansel," she said. He looked up. "I need you to formally request me as your treating clinician, in writing in the chart right now." He understood immediately. She could see it. If a patient formally requested a specific treating clinician, removing that clinician required the patient's consent as well as administrative authority. It didn't block the injunction entirely, but it added a layer. He pulled his own chart up on the bedside tablet and typed 4 sentences. He signed it with his physician credentials because he was also a physician, and he understood exactly what he was doing and why. "Done," he said. "Good. Don't get off that monitor. She went back to the nurse's station. The phone call to cardiology took 40 seconds, and the cardiology fellow on call, a woman named Dr. Siobhan Kwok, who had the voice of someone who functioned best when given specific information in a specific sequence, responded to Lena's explanation with focused precision. They would take Park upstairs. They would take Greer upstairs. Kwok wanted the full compound exposure documentation, which didn't exist in any civilian system, and Lena told her she would transfer what she could through Reese's team and fill in the rest verbally when she came up. Come up when? Kwok asked. As soon as I've checked the other two. Patricia Vane in Bay 12 was 66, and her arrhythmia history was atrial flutter, and when Lena checked her, she was showing early signs of sympathetic rebound acceleration, but nothing yet in the third cycle range. Douglas Marsh in Bay 9 was 58, post-bypass, and his presentation was the least concerning of the four, but that was a low bar and she noted it carefully. She went back to Walter Greer in Bay 7. He was still sitting up. The ice chips were gone. He had his hands folded in his lap with the patience of a man who understood how to wait. I'm moving you upstairs, she said. Cardiac monitoring floor. That serious? Precautionary. But yes, somewhat serious. He nodded. He looked at his hands for a moment. My wife is in the waiting room. She's been there since this morning. I'll have someone bring her up when you're settled. Her name is Eleanor. She'll want to know what's happening. I'll tell her myself, Lena said, after I get you moved. He looked at her with the particular look of someone assessing whether they're being managed or told the truth. You'll actually do that, he said. Yes. All right then, he said, and swung his legs over the side of the bed. She coordinated the transfers, Park first, then Greer, with Vane and Marsh following, and she was writing the transfer documentation when Navarro's phone buzzed and he stepped away and came back with the expression he'd had on the fourth floor, controlled but running hotter underneath. Injunction ruling came in, he said. She stopped writing. Denied, he said. She looked at him. The duty judge denied it on the grounds that an active public health emergency supersedes the filing basis. He looked like he wanted to smile but was holding it professional. Reese's JAG team argued the patient safety angle without referencing any classified materials, just the public health statute. Judge agreed. She went back to writing the transfer documentation. Taft, she said. Still on the fourth floor, still with his attorney. But the denied injunction means the DCIS can proceed with the chain of custody inquiry, and JAG's tier review is now expedited. They're flagging it as time-sensitive given the active incident. How long expedited? 2 hours. Maybe 90 minutes. She finished the transfer notes. She looked at the clock. It was 12:31 p.m. 4 hours and 25 minutes since the overpass incident. Best case on the third cycle. 3.5 hours remaining. Worst case, accounting for Park's accelerated presentation, less. She went upstairs. The cardiac monitoring floor was quieter than the emergency department in the specific way that different kinds of urgency were quiet. The ER was urgent with motion, with noise, with things happening in real time. The cardiac floor was urgent with waiting, with numbers, with the slow accumulation of data from machines attached to bodies that were doing something the machines needed to catch. Dr. Kwok was at Park's bedside when Lena arrived. Kwok was small, efficient, with the contained intensity of someone who had decided at some early point in her training that medicine was too important for wasted movement and had never revised the decision. She was reading Park's monitor the way Lena had read it downstairs, with the same systematic focus, and she looked up when Lena came in. The Big M&E's stable, Kwok said. Not progressing. Yet, Lena said. She pulled the chair beside Kwok's position and sat. The third metabolic cycle. I got partial information from the compound's developer. He confirmed it affects cardiac variant presentations differently, but he stopped talking before I got the full picture. How far short of the full picture are we? I know it's a sympathetic rebound event with direct myocardial effect. I know it's self-limiting in healthy baselines. I know the cardiac variant presentations are not self-limiting. I don't know the specific mechanism of the third cycle myocardial effect. Kwok was quiet for a moment, running the logic. Calcium handling? Possibly. Or sodium channel involvement given the original compound class. If it's sodium channel, then standard rebound management could make it worse, Lena said. Yes. They looked at each other across Park's bed. Park was watching them both with the alert stillness of someone who was processing the fact that the two physicians responsible for keeping his heart working had just identified a gap in their information. "I need more from Taft," Lena said. "Then get it," Kwok said. She said it simply, without drama. It was the most straightforward statement of the obvious Lena had heard all day, and it clarified something she'd been working around. She went back downstairs and found Reese in the corridor outside the ER. "I need 15 minutes with Taft," she said, unrecorded. He looked at her. "I'm not asking him to confess to anything," she said. "I'm asking him to tell me the mechanism of the third cycle cardiac effect, so I can keep his victims alive. Those two things are separate, and I need you to separate them for him." His attorney filed an injunction to remove the one person managing his compound's victims, and the judge threw it out in 40 minutes. His attorney is not having a good day. She held Reese's gaze. "Give me 15 minutes. Tell him clinical information only. Tell him it doesn't go to the investigators." "Does it?" She looked at him steadily. "The clinical information doesn't. What I do with it stays in the hospital." He thought about this for 6 seconds. She counted. 15 minutes, he said. Taft was where they'd left him, behind his desk. But the attorney was no longer in the room. He was visible through the glass partition of an adjacent conference space, on his phone, the particular stance of someone receiving information about a legal defeat. Polk was still in the room, standing near the window, and he stepped aside when Lena entered without being asked, which she appreciated. Taft looked at her when she came in. He had the look of a man who had spent the last hour and a half processing a sequence of events that had not gone the way he'd planned and who was recalibrating. "The injunction was denied," he said. "Yes." "Raymond," she said, using his first name deliberately, not to create false intimacy, but because she needed the conversation to happen between two people rather than between a subject and an authority. "I have 4 patients upstairs on cardiac monitoring who are going to enter a third exposure cycle in the next 2 to 4 hours. One of them is 29 years old. He's a physician. He was in the ambulance bay this morning and didn't know what was in the air." Taft said nothing. "The third cycle mechanism," she said. "I need the specific pathway. Calcium handling, sodium channel, something else. I need to know what I'm managing." He looked at his desk, at the legal pad, at the empty pill organizer. "This doesn't go to the DCIS file," he said. "Clinical information stays in the hospital." He was quiet for a long moment. She let the silence sit, because pushing it would give him a reason to make this about the push rather than the patients. "Ryanodine receptor destabilization," he said finally. "The third cycle effect is direct RIR2 channel disruption, calcium handling, spontaneous SR calcium release." Calcium handling, exactly as Kwok had suggested. Duration? The acute phase is 2 to 4 hours. If they get through the first 90 minutes, the spontaneous release cycle burns itself out. Suppressant? Flecainide works against the channel disruption, lower dose than you'd use for standard arrhythmia. The standard dosing will overshoot. She stood up. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her when she said it, and she said it without irony and without contempt and without satisfaction, because she meant it specifically and purely. Thank you for giving her the information she needed to keep his victims alive. And the look on his face when he understood that was something she would not have been able to describe if asked. She was out the door and on the phone to Kwok before she reached the elevator. The next 90 minutes were the kind of medicine that happened in the space between panic and precision, the narrow band where good decisions were possible and bad ones were fatal. And the difference between them was whether you had the right information at the right moment. She had the right information. She gave it to Kwok in full, and Kwok moved on it with the efficient intensity that made Lena glad she'd made the cardiology call, instead of trying to manage 4 cardiac variant exposures from the ER floor. Park's Bigemini stabilized 40 minutes into the Flecainide protocol, which was the direction it needed to go, but faster than expected, which meant his presentation was acute enough that the timing had been genuinely tight. He didn't say anything about it when she checked on him at the 90-minute mark. He was sitting up in the monitored bed with a cup of water, and his monitor was showing a rhythm that was not perfect, but was measurably and verifiably better than it had been. "Your chart notation saved time," she said. "The cardiac history flag." "I document everything," he said. "I know. Keep doing that." She left the cardiac floor at 2:14 p.m., and went back to the ER and stood at the nurse's station and looked at the board. The overpass patient count had begun to reduce as some of the less severe cases were cleared for discharge. The 2 secondary phase patients she'd flagged this morning were both stable. Sandra Voss was still in Bay 4 but moving toward transfer. The board was managing itself. She picked up a chart and started updating notes, because there were always notes, always documentation that needed to catch up with the events of the day, and she worked through the stack with the same systematic attention she brought to everything. Donna Price brought her coffee at some point. Real coffee, from outside the building. Lena looked at the cup and then at Donna. Greg ran out during the second transfer window, Donna said. He asked what you took in it. She took the coffee. Whitfield came to the station at 2:47 p.m. He stood on the other side of the counter and didn't say anything for a moment. She kept writing, not out of rudeness, but because she was mid-sentence in a clinical note, and finishing sentences mattered. When she finished, she looked up. The Kowalski kid, he said. 8 years old, 3 years ago. She waited. I remember it. He looked at the counter. I signed off on that chart because I trusted my own read. I didn't recheck. He looked up. I've signed off on a lot of things because I trusted my own read. She looked at him steadily. I'm not asking you to... He stopped, started again. I'm not going to tell you this fixes anything. I know it doesn't. No, she said. It doesn't. He nodded. He seemed to have expected that and accepted it, which was possibly the first sign she'd seen all day that there was something in him capable of accepting it. He walked back to the department. She went back to the notes. At 3:22 p.m., Navarro appeared at the nurse's station with the particular energy of someone carrying information that had weight to it. Jag cleared the tier review, he said. The full chain of custody documentation is unsealed. DCIS has what they need for the arrest. She put down her pen. There's more, he said. She looked at him. The synthesis batch that was diverted. It wasn't just Taft. He set his phone on the counter with a document pulled up. The chain of custody review identified 2 co-signatories on the decommissioning verification. Both signed off that the compound was destroyed. Neither of them were in the storage facility at the time of destruction. He paused. One of them works for the Department of Defense. The other one, he looked at her, is the current medical director of the Calloway Health System. Lena picked up his phone and looked at the name, Dr. Harlan Voss. She read it twice. She looked at Navarro. Sandra Voss, she said. We saw it too, Navarro said. Her ID, in the patient registration. We ran it. She's his sister. The emergency department moved around them. The board, the bays, the steady institutional rhythm of a building that had been through something and was still standing. Sandra Voss in Bay 4, whose heart rate had come back from 44, whose stress cardiomyopathy had resolved, who had told Lena she was glad she hadn't listened. Does she know? Lena asked. We don't know what she knows. She thought about the overpass, the structural failure, 22 victims, a modified compound with a cardiac variant that nobody outside a classified program would recognize, a chain of custody signed off by 2 people who weren't present. The overpass wasn't a test, she said slowly, and it wasn't random. Navarro looked at her. Someone knew the compound would be misidentified, she said. Someone knew that the first responders and the receiving hospitals wouldn't catch the secondary phase. Someone planned for the window between exposure and recognition. She looked at the board. Except nobody planned for me being here. The silence stretched between them. Reese needs to know all of this, she said. He does know, Navarro said. He's known about Harlan Voss for about 40 minutes. He's been working out how to approach Sandra Voss without compromising her status as a patient. He paused. He wants you in the room when it happens. She looked at Bay 4. She's my patient, she said. That's why he wants you there. She thought about a woman who had been 44 beats per minute and gray around the mouth, who had been grateful to someone she didn't know for not listening to a man she didn't know, who was now in a hospital bed recovering from a compound that her brother had helped divert and deploy. She thought about the particular weight of that and what it would do to a person to learn it. She stood up. She walked toward Bay 4, and halfway there the department intercom crackled with the overhead paging tone, and the voice that came through was not the usual paging voice. It was Greg, at the unit coordinator desk, and his voice had the quality of someone reading something that had just appeared on his screen. Attention emergency department. Administration is requesting all senior staff to the main conference room on the second floor. Immediate attendance. This is a facility-wide announcement. She stopped walking. That's not a standard announcement, Donna said from somewhere behind her. Navarro was already on his phone. He listened for 15 seconds, then lowered it. Reese says don't go up yet, he said. Stay in the department. Why? He looked at his phone, then at her. Because Harlan Voss just called a facility-wide meeting, he said. And Reese says the timing is not a coincidence. She stood in the middle of the emergency department she had been fired from 6 hours ago, with the board running and the patient stable and the notes half finished on the counter, and she looked at the intercom speaker above the nurses' station like she could read something in it. Harlan Voss was the medical director of this hospital. He had co-signed documentation verifying the destruction of a compound that had ended up on a civilian highway 14 miles from the building where he worked. He had board-level access to the same system that Taft had used to pull patient charts, and he was now convening every senior staff member in the building into a single room. She thought about who would be in that room. She thought about Whitfield, who had just walked back into the department. She thought about Donna Price, who had been at the nurses' station all morning and had seen and heard more of this day than almost anyone. She thought about the building's security officers, who were positioned on the 4th floor near Taft's office. She thought about the one place in the hospital that would be left substantially unoccupied if every senior staff member was called upstairs simultaneously. She looked at Bay 4. She started walking again. Navarro caught up to her. Reese said don't go up, she said. I'm not going up. She pushed through the Bay 4 curtain. Sandra Voss was sitting up in the bed with the look of someone who had been listening to the overhead announcement and parsing the name in it and arriving, perhaps, at a specific destination. Her face when she saw Lena had something in it that was not the gratitude from earlier and not the relief from earlier. It was something rawer and less processed. My brother works here, Sandra Voss said. I know, Lena said. The announcement. She looked at the curtain as if she could see through it. That's him. Yes. Sandra Voss looked at her hands. They were in her lap, and they were very still, with the particular stillness of someone holding themselves together by concentrating on a physical point. Is he part of what happened this morning? She asked. The question was direct and clean, and did not dress itself up, and Lena recognized in it the specific courage of someone who was asking a question they already suspected the answer to, because not knowing was worse. That's what the federal investigators are working to determine, Lena said, which was the accurate answer and the honest one, and also the only one she could give. Sandra Voss nodded. Her hands tightened slightly, then relaxed. Can you stay? She said, while they figure it out. I'm not going anywhere, Lena said. Outside the bay, the department was moving. Navarro's voice in the corridor, rapid and low. Reese, probably, on the 4th floor. And upstairs in the main conference room, a man who had co-signed a lie about a destroyed compound was calling the senior staff of his hospital into a room for reasons that Reese was still working out. And somewhere in this building, or on their way to it, were the answers to questions that a morning had raised and an afternoon had not yet finished answering. Lena pulled the chair beside Sandra Voss's bed and sat down. She had learned, in years of operating in places that didn't officially exist, that the moments after the highest point of pressure were not the safe moments people imagined them to be. They were the moments when what had been hidden decided whether to stay hidden or come out. And something in this building had not yet come out. She stayed in Bay 4 for 4 minutes. Not because she was hiding, because Sandra Voss needed a human presence in the room, while the building rearranged itself around something none of them had finished understanding yet. And because Lena had learned long ago that the instinct to be in motion during uncertain moments was often the instinct that got people hurt. Sometimes the most tactically sound position was the one you were already in. She checked Sandra's vitals, stable. She checked the monitor, clean. She asked Sandra if she needed anything, and Sandra said no, and they sat in the particular quiet of two people who were both waiting for different versions of the same thing. Then Navarro's voice came through the curtain gap, low and direct. Hargrove, now. She stood. She touched Sandra's arm once, briefly, not saying anything because there wasn't anything to say that would make the next hour easier. Then she went through the curtain. Navarro was in the corridor with his phone in his hand and the look of someone who had received information that had restructured the situation. Harlan Voss isn't in the conference room, he said. She waited. He called the meeting and he's not in it. His assistant says he left the building 20 minutes ago through the parking structure. The security officers on the fourth floor were pulled to manage the conference room assembly. He looked at her. Nobody thought to watch the exits. She calculated rapidly. 20 minutes was not a large head start, but it was a real one, and a man who had spent years operating in the overlap between legitimate institutional authority and covert activity would know how to use 20 minutes. "Reese," she said, "already moving. He's got DCIS coordinating with state police on the exits. But Voss knows this area. He's been here 4 years," he paused. "He also knows which roads the state police don't cover well." She thought about the medications on Taft's desk, the diuretic combination. She thought about what she'd told Reese about Taft's inability to travel far. "Voss's medical file," she said. "Is he a patient here?" Navarro blinked. "He's the medical director. He wouldn't use his own hospital's system for—" "People use what's convenient," she said. "Pull it." He pulled it. 2 minutes with a DCIS override on the system access. The file came up on his phone and she read it over his shoulder and found what she was looking for in the current medications section. No significant cardiac history. No mobility limitations. He was 61, fit by the looks of his last physical, and there was nothing in his file that would restrict where he could go or how fast. But there was something else. The emergency contact on file. The relationship listed next to the name. Sister, Sandra Voss, with an address in Falls Church, Virginia. She looked at the curtain to Bay 4. "He won't go to her address," she said, thinking aloud. "He knows we have her, but he'll go somewhere she'd know." She turned to Navarro. "Does DCIS have access to her financial records? Property records?" "With a federal warrant, yes." "Get one." She was already walking toward the nurses' station. "And tell Reese to check any property held jointly between Harlan Voss and Sandra Voss, or any trust with either name. Not just his name, hers." Navarro was on the phone before she reached the station. She picked up a chart. She started writing because there were still patients, and there were still notes, and the institutional machinery of the hospital did not pause for federal investigations, and also because she needed something to do with her hands while she thought. The next 22 minutes were the kind of time that moved strangely. The emergency department ran its own rhythm independently of the investigation happening above and around it. Donna Price managed the board. The discharge paperwork for 3 of the overpass patients processed through. A new intake arrived. A construction worker with a hand injury, nothing to do with the morning's events, just the ordinary accumulation of the day's damage. She assessed him in 4 minutes, flagged the laceration depth for the attending, and went back to the overpass charts. She was midway through the 3rd chart when Navarro reappeared. "Reese found him," he said. She put the chart down. "A property in Linden, Virginia. 45 minutes from here, registered to a family trust with both their names." He checked his phone. "State police and DCIS are there. He was in the house." "Was?" "He's in custody." A pause. "He didn't run when they came in, just sat at the kitchen table." Another pause, shorter. "His attorney is already en route." She thought about a man sitting at a kitchen table in a house that belonged to both himself and his sister, waiting for what came next. She thought about what it meant to run and then stop running, and she decided she didn't have enough information about Harlan Voss as a person to understand it and didn't need to. "And Taft," she said, "formally arrested 40 minutes ago. The JAG documentation gave DCIS everything they needed, the synthesis diversion, the falsified destruction verification, the modification work he continued after decommissioning." Navarro looked at his phone, then at her. "There are 2 other names connected to the distribution network. Neither of them are in Virginia." "Who are they?" "That information is above my current briefing level," he said. He said it without embarrassment, just as a fact. "Reese will fill you in on what you're cleared for." She went back to the chart. Reese arrived at the emergency department at 4:58 p.m. He came in through the ambulance bay, which was the way people came in when they didn't want to walk through the lobby, and he looked the way people looked after a day that had started at whatever time his day had started and had accumulated the specific weight of this particular day on top of that. He stood at the nurse's station, and she stood on the other side of it, and for a moment they didn't say anything, which was its own form of communication. "Both in custody," he said. "I know, Navarro told me." "The distribution network has 2 additional nodes. We've had those names for about 6 weeks. This was the missing link." He put his hands flat on the counter. The overpass was not a random target. The Route 19 structure was specifically selected because a DCIS evidence transport had been rerouted through that corridor 2 days prior. Whoever planned the deployment believed the transport would be caught in the incident. He looked at her steadily. They were wrong about the transport schedule. The reroute was changed at the last minute. She thought about 22 people on a highway at 8 in the morning who had nothing to do with the DCIS evidence transport, who had simply been going where they were going. The transport, she said. What was it carrying? Documentation related to the Red Line Kappa program. He paused. Specifically, the original chain of custody records that would have tied Taft and Voss to the diversion from the beginning. She looked at the board. 16 names that had been on that overpass. Names she had spent the day managing, assessing, fighting for, in corridors and Bay 4 and a consultation room with a landscape painting nobody ever looked at. They tried to destroy the evidence, she said, and created more of it. That is a consistent pattern with people who believe they're smarter than the systems they're working inside, Reese said. She thought about Whitfield, about a different kind of person who believed they were smarter than the systems they worked inside, about the ways that particular belief expressed itself differently depending on the person holding it, some toward cruelty, some toward negligence, some toward something that required a federal investigation and a chemical weapons program to fully manifest. The patients, she said, all 16 of them, they'll need follow-up. The compound's long-term profile isn't fully documented. There could be residual effects we don't have data on yet. USAMRIC D will establish a monitoring program, Reese said. You'll be consulted in the design of it. He said it as a statement, not an offer. She looked at him. Your consulting authority, he said. It doesn't expire with the acute incident. The reinstatement documentation you signed this morning covers ongoing consultation. He reached into his jacket and put a card on the counter. The formal debrief is in 10 days, Arlington, but Polk will call you tomorrow to start the compound modification documentation. He picked up the card and put it back. Then he left it again. Keep it. She picked it up. He looked at the department around them, the board, the bays, the ordinary industrial motion of a place that processed the worst moments of people's days and turned them, as often as it could, into something survivable. You saved 11 people today, he said, conservatively. The secondary phase alone would have killed 3 of the unidentified cardiac presentations if they hadn't been treated. She thought about this. Taft gave me the third cycle mechanism, she said, voluntarily. I know, Polk was in the room. That should be in the record. He gave clinical information that saved lives. Whatever else he is, that should be in the record. Reese looked at her for a long moment. It will be, he said. Then he picked up his jacket from where he'd set it on the counter and walked back out through the ambulance bay. She stood at the nurse's station for a moment after he left. The board ran. Donna Price was on the phone. Greg was sorting the afternoon's paperwork into the particular organized chaos that was the unit coordinator's native environment. Outside, through the ambulance bay doors, the afternoon had gone to that particular angle of Virginia light that happened in the fall, low and amber, and making everything look briefly more important than it was. She went upstairs. Park was sitting up in his monitored bed with a medical journal open on his lap, which she found almost funny and did not say so. His monitor showed a clean rhythm, the bigeminy completely resolved. His color was better. He looked like a person who had been shaken and had done the work of putting himself back in order. He looked up when she came in. Rhythm's been stable for 90 minutes, he said. I know, I can see the telemetry from downstairs. He nodded. He looked at the journal, then set it aside. The third cycle, the RIR2 mechanism. How did you get that? Taft told me. He was quiet for a moment, processing the shape of that. You went back up there. Yes. And he just told you. I asked him the right way, she said. And I think he understood that giving me the information was the only thing he could do in that room that wasn't entirely about protecting himself. She looked at his monitor. You're going to want to follow up with electrophysiology in 4 to 6 weeks. The compound's interaction with your channel function, there could be residual sensitivity. I'll make the appointment, he said. He looked at her for a moment. I wrote in my chart that I was requesting you as my treating clinician. I know, thank you. I also wrote a full account of this morning, time-stamped, what I observed when you administered the atropine, What happened to Voss's rhythm after? What Whitfield said? He looked at his hands. In case it mattered. She looked at him. It might matter, she said. I know, he said. That's why I wrote it. She checked his chart, updated the monitoring parameters for overnight, and left him to his journal. Walter Greer was 2 rooms down. His 3rd cycle had presented and passed. The flecainide protocol had managed the calcium dysregulation through the acute 90-minute window without incident, though not without the particular tense quality of 90 minutes spent watching numbers and willing them to hold. His rhythm was now clean enough that Dr. Kwok was talking about discharge tomorrow morning, pending a final assessment. His wife Eleanor was in the chair beside his bed. She was approximately his age, with the look of someone who had spent a significant portion of the day in a waiting room and had moved through fear and out the other side into a kind of exhausted relief. She stood when Lena came in. You're the one, she said. It wasn't a question. I'm Lena. I've been managing Walter's care today. Eleanor looked at her for a moment with the direct, unguarded assessment of someone who had stopped caring about social politeness somewhere around hour 4 in the waiting room. Then she reached out and took Lena's hand in both of hers and held it for a moment. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Lena sat with them for 7 minutes. She updated Walter's overnight orders, answered Eleanor's questions about the follow-up timeline, and told Walter that the electrophysiology referral would be arranged before discharge. When she left, Eleanor was holding Walter's hand and they were talking quietly about something that had nothing to do with any of this, which was exactly what they should be doing. She went back to the emergency department. The board had changed again. 12 of the overpass patients were now either discharged or admitted to floors with stable management plans. Sandra Voss was the last of the acute cases still in the ER, pending a cardiac floor bed that had opened up in the last hour. Lena went to Bay 4. Sandra was dressed in her hospital gown and sitting on the edge of the bed, which was the posture of someone who was ready to move but waiting for permission. Her color was good. Her breathing was even. She looked like a person who had been through something physical and come out the other side, and she also looked like a person who had been through something else entirely and was still in the middle of it. She looked up when Lena came in. They told me, she said. About Harlan. Lena sat in the chair. She didn't say anything yet because Sandra was still finding the shape of what she was saying. A federal agent came in about an hour ago. Woman, short hair. She was kind about it. As kind as you can be when you're telling someone their brother. She stopped. Her hands were in her lap. I knew something was wrong. I've known for about 2 years that something was wrong. I didn't know what. I didn't ask. She looked at the floor. I should have asked. You were on that overpass this morning, Lena said. Sandra looked up. You were one of his victims, Lena said. Whatever he knew or didn't know about who would be there, you were on that road. That's not the picture of someone who was part of it. Sandra's face did something complicated and unresolved. It doesn't make it simpler. No, Lena said. It doesn't. They sat with that for a moment. Will you be okay? Lena said. Not a clinical question, a human one. Sandra looked at her hands. Eventually, she said. I think eventually. It was the right answer. Not the comfortable one, but the honest one. And Lena had spent enough of this day around people giving her the uncomfortable, honest answer to recognize and respect it when she heard it. She helped Sandra with the transfer paperwork and walked with her to the elevator and watched the doors close. And then she stood in the corridor for a moment and was still. She had not been still, properly still, since 5:47 that morning. The stillness had a weight to it now, and she let it settle. The evening shift was coming in. She could hear the change of shift energy at the nurses' station. The particular overlap of 2 sets of people exchanging a building full of information in compressed form. Each incoming nurse receiving the shorthand of 12 hours in the space of 5 minutes. She went to the nurses' station and started writing the last of her documentation. Whitfield was at the station when she arrived. He was doing the same thing, finishing his own notes, and they worked side by side for several minutes without speaking. Then he said, "The hospital administrator is calling a board review of my conduct today, and of," he stopped, "of decisions I've made in this department over the past several years." She kept writing. "Specifically, the Kowalski case is being reopened," he said, "and 2 others they've identified." She finished the sentence she was on. "Park documented this morning's events," she said, "time-stamped, his clinical observations. I know. A pause. I'm not going to contest it. She looked at him. He was writing, not looking at her, his pen moving across the page with the careful deliberateness of someone choosing each word. I spent a long time believing that my certainty was the same thing as being right, he said. They're not the same thing. I knew that in the abstract. I didn't apply it in practice. He stopped writing. That's not an excuse. I know it isn't. No, she said. It isn't. I know. They went back to writing. It was not reconciliation. It was not the resolution of 3 years of dismissal and condescension and a day on which he had ordered her out of a room and nearly let a person die. It was just two people doing their notes at the end of a shift, and the truth between them was the truth, unadorned and not yet fully accounted for. Some things did not resolve in a day. Some things required the slower machinery of consequence and time and institutional process, and that machinery was now in motion, and what came out of it would be what it was. She finished her documentation at 6:34 p.m. She was putting on her jacket in the locker room, the same jacket she'd put on 11 hours ago when Whitfield had told security to escort her out, when her phone rang. Reese. The hospital administrator, he said without preamble. Greta Hollis. She wants to meet with you tomorrow morning. What about? She didn't specify to me, but DCIS briefed her this afternoon on the scope of the investigation. She knows about Harlan Voss. She knows about the board-level system access. She knows that the hospital's medical director co-signed falsified destruction documentation for a compound that was deployed a 14-mile radius from this building. He paused. She's going to have a significant institutional problem, and she's going to need people she can trust to help her rebuild. Lena thought about this. I'm a nurse, she said. You're a sergeant first class with 9 years of specialized medical experience who spent today managing a classified chemical exposure event that your hospital's own medical director helped engineer, Reese said. Greta Hollis is a practical woman. She's going to make you a practical offer. She put the phone in her pocket without responding to that directly, because she needed to think about it, and she was not someone who made decisions about things she hadn't thought through. She walked out of the locker room, through the back corridor, and out the side door into the hospital's east parking lot. The evening had come down fully now. Virginia fall, cool and dry, with that particular quality of air that existed in the specific window between the heat of the day and the cold of the night, when everything smelled faintly of leaves and wood smoke from somewhere distant. Her car was in the far lot, the same spot, near the broken light fixture. She walked toward it. She was 2/3 of the way there when she heard footsteps behind her and turned. It was Greg. He was still in his unit coordinator scrubs, which meant he hadn't left yet, which meant he'd stayed through a shift change that wasn't his. He was holding her coffee thermos. You left this on the bench this morning, he said. When you were… He stopped. When everything happened. She looked at the thermos. The coffee inside it had been cold since 8 in the morning. She took it from him. Thank you, she said. He looked at her with the specific expression of a 24-year-old who has witnessed something he doesn't have the full language for yet. Is it always like this? He said. She thought about it honestly. No, she said. Usually it's quieter. But the underneath of it, the part where you have to decide whether to do the right thing when it costs you something, that part is always there. He nodded slowly, like he was filing it away in a place where he kept things that mattered. She drove home. Her apartment was the same as she'd left it at 5:30 that morning. The mug on the counter from yesterday's coffee. The book she'd been reading face down on the arm of the couch. The window above the sink that she always left cracked because she liked the air, and the sound of the street below it, and the reminder that the world outside kept moving regardless of what was happening inside. She sat on the couch without turning on a light. She thought about the day, not in sequence, but in the way her mind naturally organized things, by weight. Sandra Voss's heart rate climbing back from 44. Park's Begemini resolving on the monitor at the 40-minute mark. Walter Greer saying all right then and swinging his legs over the side of the bed. Taft saying ryanodine receptor, calcium handling, the 1 inch of honesty he'd allowed himself in a room where honesty cost him. The look on Whitfield's face in Bay 4, standing at the back, watching a resuscitation he hadn't known how to run. She thought about 3 years of early mornings and cold coffee and a parking spot with a broken light fixture. 3 years of keeping her head down and her record clean and her past exactly where she'd chosen to put it, behind her, sealed, belonging to a version of herself she'd decided wasn't relevant to the life she was building. The thing about a past that you've sealed is that it doesn't actually go anywhere, it just waits. And sometimes what it's waiting for is the moment when the sealed thing is exactly what the present moment needs. And all the choosing and the sealing and the quiet years of being the person nobody looks at directly, all of that becomes the reason you're still standing when everyone else is trying to figure out what happened. She had not planned to be useful today. She had planned to be invisible, which was a different project entirely, and one she'd been reasonably successful at until a highway collapsed, and a compound class she recognized came through the ambulance bay doors. You didn't choose the moment chose you, and what it found when it got there was either enough or it wasn't. She picked up her phone and looked at Reese's number for a while. Then she put the phone down and picked up the book from the arm of the couch and read for 40 minutes, because she needed something that was not the day before she could make decisions about what came after it. The meeting with Greta Hollis was at 9 the next morning. She arrived at 8:55. The administrator's office was on the second floor, the kind of office that had been designed to communicate stability. Solid furniture, neutral colors, framed credentials on the wall, a desk that sat between you and the administrator like an argument for institutional permanence. Greta Hollis was 62, with short practical hair and the posture of someone who had spent 40 years in hospital administration and had stopped performing administrative authority a long time ago and simply embodied it. She stood when Lena came in, which was not the move of someone who needed to demonstrate power, and she shook Lena's hand with the directness of someone who had already decided they were going to be direct. "Sit down," she said. "This is going to be a real conversation, not a presentation." Lena sat. "I've been briefed," Hollis said. "Fully. DCIS, USAMRICT, the JAG documentation, the chain of custody review. I understand what happened in this building yesterday, and I understand the role Harlan Voss played, and I understand the role Raymond Taft played, and I understand how those roles connected to a board structure I was responsible for overseeing." She looked at Lena without looking away. "I missed it. For 4 years, I missed it. I want you to know that I understand that, and I'm not going to ask you to pretend I didn't." Lena held her gaze. "The board review of Dr. Whitfield's conduct is proceeding," Hollis said. "The Kowalski case and the 2 subsequent cases are being reopened through the state medical board. That process will take the time it takes, and I am not going to interfere with it." She paused. "Dr. Whitfield has tendered a voluntary suspension pending review. That was his decision." "I know," Lena said. Hollis looked at her steadily. "I'm creating a position, Director of Emergency Clinical Operations. It covers both the department's medical protocols and the nursing chain of authority, which in this hospital have been operating as separate silos in ways that contributed to what happened yesterday." She set a folder on the desk and did not open it. "I want to offer it to you." Lena looked at the folder. "Your federal consulting authority is separate," Hollis said. "USAMRIC-D has already contacted me. The 2 roles can coexist. You'd handle the hospital operations and consult on the federal side when needed. Reese's team will manage the scheduling conflicts when they arise." She opened the folder. "The salary is here. The scope is here. The authority structure. You would report directly to me, not through a medical hierarchy, because what yesterday demonstrated is that the medical hierarchy in this building has a structural problem that I don't think can be fixed from inside it." Lena read the scope document. She read it completely, because she always read documents completely. "The nurses in this department," she said when she'd finished. "Yes?" "The system in which a nurse who identifies a clinical problem has no formal mechanism to escalate it past a physician who dismisses it. That needs to change." "I agree," Hollis said. "That's in the scope. I want a formal clinical flagging protocol. Any nurse, any shift, any department. A flagged concern goes into the chart and gets a mandatory attending review within 30 minutes. If the attending dismisses it, it escalates to me." "I'll add it to the scope," Hollis said. She was writing. "And Tobias," Lena said. Hollis looked up. "Bay 6, yesterday morning. 14 years old, ureteral stone presentation. He got lost in the MCI response. I need to know his outcome." Hollis looked at her computer screen. "Discharged yesterday evening, urology follow-up scheduled. The resident who managed his case, Dr. Solis, flagged the attending delay in the chart." She looked at Lena. "The flag is going to the system review I'm running on yesterday's events." Lena nodded. Do you want time to think about the offer? Hollis asked. She thought about the broken light fixture in the far parking lot. She thought about the thermos of coffee she'd never gotten to drink, which she had washed last night and which was sitting on her counter this morning, clean and waiting. No, she said. Hollis looked at her. I'll take it, Lena said, on the condition that the clinical flagging protocol is in the scope document before I sign. Hollis turned to her computer, typed for 90 seconds, and printed a revised page. She slid it across the desk. Lena read it. The language was clear and specific and left no room for the kind of institutional interpretation that turned meaningful protections into decorative ones. She signed. She walked out of Greta Hollis's office at 9:41 a.m. and stood in the second-floor corridor for a moment with her copy of the signed document in her hand. The hospital moved around her. Wheels on linoleum, a distant intercom page. Someone's family at the end of the hall, 3 of them, with the particular tight cluster of people who are waiting for news and holding each other in place while they wait. An orderly moving a cart with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has done this route 10,000 times and has found a steady rhythm in it. She folded the document and put it in her jacket pocket. She took the stairs down to the emergency department. The morning shift was running full. The board had 11 names on it, none of them from yesterday's overpass list. All of them the ordinary accumulation of an ordinary morning's damage. A man with chest pain in Bay 2. A woman with a broken wrist in Bay 5. A child with a fever in Bay 8. The endless and necessary work of a place that existed specifically because the human body was fragile and the world was not gentle with fragile things. Donna Price was at the nurse's station. She looked up when Lena came in. Lena put her copy of the signed document on the counter. Donna read the title. Her expression did something that was not quite a smile and not quite anything else. Something more specific than either, the expression of someone who has watched a particular truth arrive at its correct destination after a long time in transit. When do you start? Donna said. 2 weeks, Lena said. I'm finishing my patient follow-up notes first. Donna nodded. She picked up the document, read it fully, and set it back down. Flagging protocol, she said. In writing, Lena said. In the scope. Donna looked at her for a long moment. The Kowalski kid, she said. 3 years ago. I knew you were right. I know, Lena said. I didn't say anything. I know, Lena said again. And she didn't say it with bitterness or with absolution, but with the plain weight of a true thing acknowledged between 2 people who had both been inside the same broken system and made different calculations about what they could afford. I will, Donna said. Next time. Yes, Lena said. You will. She went to the medication cart and started the morning check, because the morning check needed doing, and she was still a nurse in this department until the paperwork formally changed, and the work did not pause for the paperwork. Dr. Park came in at 10:15, cleared from the cardiac floor with an electrophysiology follow-up scheduled and instructions to stay out of the department for 4 days. He ignored the last instruction and came in anyway, in street clothes, and stood at the nurse's station with a cup of coffee from the place across the street. You're supposed to be resting, she said without looking up from the chart. I know, he said. I wanted to see the board. She looked up. I was looking at the board with the specific attention of someone who had almost lost his ability to stand in front of it, and was aware of that, and was looking at it anyway. Go home, she said. In a minute, he said. She let him have the minute. He finished his coffee. He looked at the board until he'd seen whatever he needed to see. Then he nodded once to nobody in particular and went home. The day ran its course. At 3 in the afternoon, she received a text from a number she didn't recognize, and then recognized as Reese's personal cell, which was different from the official number on the card. It said, Taft's full debrief this morning, 2 additional network nodes confirmed, arrest pending in Baltimore and Roanoke. The overpass was the end of the operation, not the beginning. You should know that. She read it twice. Then she put her phone back in her pocket and went back to work. Later, much later, after the afternoon shift had begun and the board had turned over and the overpass patients' follow-up protocols were logged and filed, and the clinical flagging system's first draft was in Hollis's email, and she was standing again in the far parking lot near the broken light fixture, she thought about what Reese had written. The overpass was the end of the operation, which meant that somewhere between the beginning of it and the end of it, Someone had miscalculated badly enough that the whole thing had unraveled in a single morning. Not because of a federal investigation, not because of intelligence work, not because of anything that had been planned or prepared or authorized. Because a quiet woman in a parking spot near a broken light fixture had recognized a compound class from a decade ago and decided that accuracy mattered more than authority. That was the thing about power wielded quietly. It didn't announce itself. It didn't make speeches. It didn't wait for permission or recognition or the right moment, because the right moment was always just the moment when someone who knew what they were looking at decided to look. She unlocked her car. She thought about the nurses who would flag clinical concerns starting next month and know they would be heard. She thought about the patients who would not die from dismissed observations and overruled instincts. She thought about the particular and ordinary heroism of being the person in the room who sees clearly and does not look away, even when looking away is what everyone around you is doing, even when looking away would be easier and safer and would not cost you your job on a Tuesday morning. She thought about 3 years of nobody learning her name correctly. She thought about Sandra Voss saying, "I'm glad you didn't listen," and Walter Greer saying, "All right then," and Park writing her cell number on his glove, and Taft in that room where the only thing he gave that wasn't self-protection was 4 words: ryanodine receptor, calcium handling. That had been enough. She got in the car. She sat for a moment in the particular silence of an enclosed space at the end of a long day. Here's what she knew, not as a lesson someone had taught her, but as a thing she had arrived at through years of doing the work, in rooms where nobody was watching. The world does not give power to the people who deserve it. It gives power to the people who take it, and the people who take it are very often the wrong ones, and the people who deserve it are very often the ones sitting quietly in the corner being told to stay in their lane. And the only answer to that, the only one that actually worked, the only one that had ever worked, was to stay in the room anyway. To keep your hand steady, to read the chart twice, to say stop the fluids when stopping the fluids is what saves the life, regardless of who is telling you to step back. Not because someone will see it, not because you'll be rewarded for it, but because the alternative is to be the person who looked away, and some people are not built for that. And she had known for a very long time that she was not one of them. She started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, past the broken light fixture that facilities management had logged 17 work orders to fix and hadn't, and she drove home through the amber Virginia afternoon, and the road was long and the light was good, and she did not look back.